Trump or Kamala Harris. In just a few weeks, the US electorate will make a choice in an election whose outcome will have reverberations as far away as Chennai. To discuss the issues surrounding this crucial election, we are joined by representatives from America's two major political parties, Ms. Deshika Ruffin from Kamala Harris's Democratic Party and Ms. Allison Williams from Donald Trump's Republican Party. As we speak, your country is headed to a very historic presidential election. The result could be historic in more than one ways. Is the United States ready for its first woman president?
So absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having us. I think the United States is absolutely ready for its first Black woman with Indian descent president of the United States. While she's not the first woman to run for president, right?
Why will this be different this time?
Well, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, right? And so there is a pathway to show that a woman can win president. So this is not something that's just out of the ordinary. What's different this time is the level balance, the balancing, right? So we have Kamala Harris, who is the current vice president, right? So the number 2 in command. She has taken a different approach where it is a 50 strategy approach. Beyond the blue wall, she's not taking any vote for granted. And so the way that she's showing up, the way that there is excitement on the ground that is happening every single day. We know we've been here before, and we know that we've learned a lot from 2016. And so while this race is very, very, very tight, no matter what the polls might show you, and every vote is going to count. She absolutely has an advantage.
You believe the glass ceiling can be shattered this time?
The glass ceiling is going to burst open.
Does this not embarrass you that despite being a very old, mature democracy, you have not been able to produce a woman president in centuries, while it has been possible in young democracies in inceptional years in this very region, South Asia?
I think it's important to remember that the United States has only given the women the right to vote in the last 100 years. And so I absolutely believe it's time for a woman president as well. I'd prefer, of course, that it were a Republican candidate that we're up for election. But I think part of that delay has been in the fact that women and other categories of American citizens did not have the right to vote until relatively recently. And so we see those cultural barriers, those social barriers being broken in many things, in business, in politics, and I think it is time, and we're ready for it.
History will also be made if Mr. Trump is re-elected the president. Chances of his victory almost looked certain just a few weeks ago when Mr. Biden was a candidate. Now it looks like, according to polls, the momentum has turned topsy-turvy. Do you think a Trump presidency again is a possibility?
I do, because even though Vice President Harris has gained in the polls from where President Biden was, the polls, even current polls, are showing that they are within the margin of error. And so it is going to continue to be a very close race. Just as Vice President Harris is getting her campaign strategy and policy developed, the Trump campaign is now re-engineering its strategy for how to address this honeymoon period, this surge of support for this new candidate. I think we'll continue to see a very close race.
She's been able to extend the honeymoon period in a way where it almost feels like it is here to stay. We've seen the rallies that she has had, right? So where she's crisscrossing the United States, specifically in our swing state and battleground states. You're seeing the energy on the ground, the increased volunteerism that is coming from her campaign, the massive amount of money that she has, that she's going to have in her war chest. They're coming from first-time donors, right? So it's not the established base of donors and bundlers that you normally see. These are people who have, for the first time, are giving money.
One widespread criticism on Mr. Trump is, wherever Mr. Trump goes, chaos follows.
I don't disagree with that assessment. I think it's been very difficult for this candidate to stay on message, to clearly define his own policies, and to pivot from the strategy that he had developed in contest with President Biden, and now changing to Vice President Harris.
Despite domestic issues, one global concern is over his
isolationist tendencies, such as his position on NATO, security interests of close allies, and his position on multilateral institutions like the UN. It's a very concerning position that he takes.
I completely agree. We as Americans tend to be more global in our thoughts, and so it is concerning to me as a Republican that we would turn towards more isolationist policies, both in terms of foreign policy and our trade policy. And so what I suggest when folks ask me about this Trump dynamic is to recall that it's not just the president that makes these decisions. Even with campaign promises, they rely on the support of the legislature, the federal national legislature, to enact things like treaties and to pull out of certain things. And so it's not just one individual who may make statements that are somewhat
but he has proven himself to be capable of doing these things.
But I think the arm of the Republican Party that is more moderate and more global in its thinking is prepared to push back effectively on that.
That did not stop from pulling from the Paris Accord.
Yeah. I think there was surprise on all parts when those things happen, and the broader swath of the Republican Party is more prepared to address those in the future.
Your comments?
I actually think that President Trump has pretty much held the Republican Party hostage. And so while I do think there are individuals within the party that want to speak out and want to shift the narrative, they're left powerless, right? He has created a base that is almost like a cult-like behavior. And so while in theory there are checks and balances within both sides, right, within government, I think a Trump re-election will be catastrophic for democracy.
How would you respond to this criticism that Trump has changed the Republican Party to the party of Trump?
Yeah.
I think it's a fair assessment in terms of the tenor of political attacks and going towards this more isolationist policy position that you've described. However, we look also across the nation at the governors of the states who have more direct responsibility and connection with their citizens every day. And so it's not just Congress, it is also these governors that
Most of them have coalesced around Trump.
That's actually not true. Not at least in the governors, it has not been true. Maybe on the political side, but when it comes to the actual on-the-ground policy changes, the things that matter to states and to citizens on a daily basis, it may not be public, but there absolutely has been pushback on President Trump's policies and his attacks, his personal attacks on his opponents.
Talking about personal attacks and counterattacks, observing your elections from far here, it looks like your society and political environment has become extremely polarized. A professor at Tel Aviv University, where I studied, would say, America needs a two-state solution, not Israel, a democratic state and a Republican state. Families are divided down in the middle.
I don't agree with that. In fact, I hope by the fact that Dashika and I are here today suggests that Americans can work together. We agree on a lot of the major issues that need to be addressed. We may disagree on how we answer those, but this kind of dialogue, respectful disagreement, and civic and civil conversations are actually the bedrock of Americans. I think this idea that American families are split tends to get amplified unfairly. And so I know there's political divide within my family. We still have conversations over the dinner table where we're respectful and care about each other. And so I think the amplification in the media should be suspect, should be taken with a grain of salt.
So the way that our system works in Congress, you have to have compromise, right? So we saw this with the passing of the infrastructure bill, right? While there was a comprehensive immigration bill that was put forth,
Bipartisan consensus was not achieved.
It's kind of hard to reach bipartisanship during an election year, but outside of the election year, that's usually how Congress works. They work to make sure that there is not a shutdown of the government, right? And so there is no such thing as unilateral power within our frame of government. It takes both sides to come together, and that's what you usually see. However, during political discourse and those framings are what sells news, right? And so you're going to see a lot of that specifically for the next, 2 months of the election, because that is one, when we have a candidate like Trump, that is kind of what he is pushing for. But then also, that is what gets people to tune into the media every single.
In your views, what are the key deciding issues in this election?
I think immigration, as I mentioned earlier, will be key. But the biggest thing that is facing American voters and American citizens writ large this year is inflation. In that, we're still seeing groceries and things like petrol at very high rates. And so Americans are not seeing that every day. And so I think that will continue to be, that will be the most important issue in the election.
Will voters not hold Kamala Harris accountable for this? Of an administration she has been an integral part of?
Yeah, so I think exactly what Alice had just mentioned. While the economy is going to be the paramount issue in this election, for most part, to your point, the economy is a strong economy, right? The inflation, it's not trickling down to everyday Americans. And so it is incumbent on the President Biden, but also Vice President Harris, to communicate and message in a way where people understand. While it's not, it does take time, right?
It's about feeling. It's not about understanding.
And absolutely, and that is the most important part of this conversation. So, and that's where there's like a disconnect between what's actually happening and the bills that are passing in order to bring down inflation, and then how people are feeling it. And so that's where you see kind of the tension right now when it comes to the economy. Both candidates are putting forth their plans. So Vice President Harris, as you've seen in the last couple of days, have been rolling out her economy plan to strengthen the middle class, to bring inflation down, to get rid of unnecessary fees, to put more money in Americans' pockets. And so you're going to see that over the coming day, where she is separating herself from the administration and putting forth her vision.
The other issue that has taken central stage is the reproductive rights.
And
Kamala Harris has a very strong message. Doesn't Republican candidate Trump look confused?
I think his messaging has been very muddled. I go back to my point about an undisciplined message and an undisciplined candidate when it comes to messaging. And so it is confusing. What is not confusing to most Republican voters is the sanctity of life, and that even with Roe v. Wade going away, protecting a woman's reproductive rights nationally, there are a lot of states that are moving in the direction of both protecting rights and the rights of women and protecting the rights of unborn citizens.
And in addition to, so we talked about the big issues on the economy, reproductive rights is going to be a galvanizing issue within not only just the Democratic Party, but overall. So where between 71 and 73% of Americans believe that women should have their own choice to do what they will with their bodies, right? And so these unpopular laws that are coming from Republican-led states to restrict reproductive rights, you're seeing a lash out of that. So you're seeing an increase in women who are running for office to defend reproductive rights. You're seeing an increase of women who are registering to vote and galvanize within this big tent of the Democratic Party. Women who we in the Democratic Party lost in 2016 are starting to come back to the Democratic Party to defend this issue. We also saw within 2022 and earlier this year, many states who reproductive rights were restricted in their states put forth ballot initiatives that passed within landslide marks, right? And so this is going to be a huge galvanizing issue. It continues to be. And that's why you see Trump is reading the tea leaves, right? And that's why he is muddying the water on his responses.
So is it an ambiguity by strategy?
Perhaps. I think because, as Dashika just pointed out, I think President Trump is continuing to try to test his messaging and see where he gets some traction. And so that can be a strategy. I think we'll start to see greater clarity around that.
That will leave him as a politician without conviction, while the other candidate has a very strong conviction.
I think President Trump has shown himself to be a man of great conviction in certain areas. I think in this instance, where we have a significant change since the devolution of Roe v. Wade, I think it is a new policy that has to be addressed, and he's looking for the right way to do that.
What appalls the world is the rise of gun violence, the continuance of gun violence. The incident in Georgia continues to shock us. Why can't Americans agree to reform this major concern?
Well, I will say that on the Republican side, we are always horrified by gun violence, particularly like we saw in a school setting just a few days ago in Georgia. That has no place in American society. What is also true is that the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution guarantees the right of Americans to bear arms. So you see Republicans really trying to figure out what does it mean to guarantee and continue to guarantee that constitutional right of Americans and balance that with school safety or just gun violence.
You acknowledge the need for reforms in the system.
I think everyone acknowledges that there has to be more discussion about it and more conversation about what is the right balance of that.
And if you want to know why there hasn't been common sense gun laws in the country, follow the money, right? So the NRA, the National Rifle Association, is the largest lobbying organization in the United States. And so when you have an organization pumping dark money into the political arena and the political system that helps candidates get elected, then they have a vested interest in not kind of muddling the waters or making waves, right? And so that's what you're seeing kind of play out, the quiet part out loud. And that's why there's such a pushback towards, while there is a sacred right to bear arms, and that's embedded in our Constitution, we have to give more than thoughts and prayers every time there's a mass shooting, right? We need policies, common law gun control, and legislation to prevent this from happening. The United States is the only country where you're seeing these type of mass issues. Every country has their own gun legislation, laws, and there's something that needs to be said of why this keeps happening in the United States and why at the end of the day, the only thing we can offer these families and these children are thoughts and prayers.
I would say that gun violence does not have a political affiliation. There are conversations all the time, not just at the national congressional level, but within states who also have bear a lot of responsibility for introducing laws, things like mental health reviews and those sorts of things. So there is ongoing conversation.
Is there a political will to address these?
Of course there is, always. No one wants to see anyone dying from gun violence.
I disagree. I think if there was political will, then we would actually see the will manifested.
Agree to disagree.
Immigration has taken a center stage. President Trump blames Biden-Harris administration for a broken immigration system. Undocumented immigrants are pouring in huge numbers, taking asylum. And the accusation is this administration of Biden-Harris has done nothing to stop this happening.
Yeah, and so as we mentioned earlier, there were many measures that were put forward, right? So the president doesn't have unilateral power to fix a system that has been broken for decades, right? And so what you saw with the Biden-Harris administration was a comprehensive immigration policy that was put forth, right? They had the endorsement of many governors in border states, but also the institutions that protect the borders, right? And so this was a bipartisan approach to this bill. And President Trump decided that he did not want this issue fixed during this time because it is a huge political talking point, and the bill was tanked, right? And so again, this goes back to the political will, right? Are we willing to sacrifice the issues that need to be addressed for political talking points?
I think it's also true, though, that we've seen the Biden administration change its tactics on whether they're going to allow a more free-flowing, or how illegal immigration in the country is prosecuted. And so under President Trump, we saw very strong policies of returning even asylum seekers to another country to await their asylum decision. Those were relaxed under the Biden administration, which further increased the numbers that were coming across the border legally and illegally.
Their point is there was an opportunity to fix it. There was a possibility for a bipartisan deal Trump torpedoed because he didn't want this issue to be fixed.
Right, but the things that the president can address, I think Biden has shown that he has gone back to a more controlled border strategy, similar to what President Trump had put into place earlier. And so it doesn't solely depend on bipartisan legislative support. Absolutely, the U.S. requires comprehensive immigration reform, but there are steps that can be taken to mitigate that in the future. I think we're only now seeing the Biden administration take those actions.
Immigration crisis fuels Trump politics. So that's why Trump doesn't want to fix it. He wants it to stay so that he can politicize it. That's the accusation that Democrats and their supporters allege.
I would just disagree with that assertion. I have no response to that because I don't think that that's true.
And even in a supporting role of vice president, Kamala Harris's key portfolio was immigration. Will the voters not hold her accountable for a broken immigration system or not fixing it?
So this is another part of the rhetoric. So I know the Republicans kind of anointed her the immigration czar, right? That was not.
Was she not?
That was not her portfolio. Her portfolio was to study the causes of the immigration system, right? So there is no quick system, a quick fix to the immigration issue that we have in the United States, right? There needs to be common sense, abilities for people to enter the country legally, but then also processes in order for, right now there's backups of the process, right? And so her job was to study the causes of it, not to wave a magic wand and fix it immediately, right? And so based off of that research, that is where you saw
the house
that
is burning,
immigration.
you don't study, you fix it.
Absolutely, but that's where you saw the recommendations that came forth in the immigration bill that I referred to initially that was tamed, right? So you can't say in one aspect that there was no effort to fix it when there was a bill that was put forward, right? You have to take that in consideration as well. And so I know going forward, that is going to be a priority in the Harris administration to make sure that the political will of both sides, because I do think that there is will on both sides to fix the issue, regardless of what the face of the party states. I think that that is going to be an issue that is going to be one of the paramount issues within the first 100 days.
And the war in the Middle East seems to have its repercussions and implications in the elections as well. How do you think it's impacting the elections and the positions and policies of the candidates?
I think Americans in general and both candidates remain concerned about the hostages that are still under Hamas control. Certainly concerned about the loss of life, like we just saw in recent days of the killing of certain hostages, including an American citizen. And so it will be an issue. I expect that it will be or will have been discussed in the debate. And so it will play in that there is a difference between Democrats and Republicans on how we address and separate Prime Minister Netanyahu from the Israeli state.
How do you separate Netanyahu and the state of Israel? It's like separating Biden and America. He represents the American country in the society.
But I would suggest that that is an important nuance to look at. Just as we've discussed that there are party heads saying certain things and there's political will within the system to continue to address these. Similarly, and I think President Biden has done this, he has said, I disagree with the way the Prime Minister is addressing this conflict. We remain committed to our relationship with the Israeli state.
Do you see a growing gulf between the sentiments on the ground and the security and foreign policy considerations of the American government?
Yeah, so I think, and going back to the Israel-Hamas conflict, so one of the things that I will say is the Republicans are kind of on brand and kind of came to a consensus on how they address the conflict. However, the Democratic Party, that is another issue, a wedge issue within the party, right? So you're seeing, I'm sure earlier this month you saw the student-led protests on college campuses across the country, right? You are seeing activists who are pro-Palestinian interrupt Vice President's speeches and her rallies, right? And so while she has calls for a ceasefire and is pushing for a hostage deal, there are a contingent of the the party who feel like she hasn't gone far enough, right? And
You
so
have
you're
concerns
seeing,
that these people will stay away from elections if not vote for Trump. They will not vote for Trump, of course. Will they stay away from the elections? Will this not impact your prospects?
yeah, so you see that conflict a lot right now. So in the primary, in the United States, before the general, we have primary elections to vote for our party's nomination. And so when Biden was the president, you saw in states that have large Muslim populations, like Michigan, had over 60,000 individuals who pledged uncommitted, refusing to vote for President Biden. And so I do think you're going to see that play out. This is an issue that's galvanizing a lot of youth, right? And so I do think if there is not a compromise, and I don't know what that compromise looks like. I don't know what the answer is beyond what she has already stated. I know she's working on a further deal, but this is a wedge issue that a lot of people have decided that they are not going to vote in this election based off
Jewish
of.
Americans are very key demographics in your country. But despite Trump taking very strong, pronounced pro-Israel positions, he's not just said things, he has acted. He has changed the Israeli embassy to Jerusalem. But a large chunk of Jewish Americans are still Democratic voters. How do you explain this?
Yeah, I think it's hard to shift historic alliances even within political voting blocs. And so certainly President Trump has not only on conviction, but courted those votes. It's up to him and it's an incumbent upon him to continue to court all types of swing and uncommitted voters to bring them over to the Republican vote and to vote for him. Voter turnout is going to be so key in this election. Certainly the policy issues are important, but how these parties turn out the vote on election day is going to be so critical to the results.
What is your comment on the state of India-US relations?
I think that I knew before I visited India, I'm seeing it on the ground here, the importance of that relationship, not just person to person, but strategically, globally, economically. My view is that the US and India enjoy very important and strong relationships, and I expect that to continue regardless of which candidate wins.
Absolutely, same. You all are a strong ally for us in the counter-terrorist initiatives, in technology, the emergence of technology. And so while there may be different approaches to the relationship, I do think no matter who wins or the outcome of November, that India-US relations will continue being strong.
The role of diaspora in this getting robust of these relations is very important. As you said, Kamala Harris on this side and Usha Vance on the other side is very emblematic of how influential that Indian diaspora has gotten in the US political space.
Yes.
And people in India, especially in this part of the world, in this region, Tamil Nadu, are very excited and following election in the US very closely.
Yeah.
See Kamala Harris as a daughter of their own.
Absolutely. You have a vested interest in seeing what happens in our elections, and Vice President Harris's heritage is the icing on the cake, right? And so I know she's very proud of her heritage. She talks about her heritage a lot, specifically the influence that her mother had on her life. And so you're going to continue seeing that play out through November and throughout.
There was a very popular meme. There's either a Kamala in the White House or a Usha in the White House.
That would be something.
Right.
So it's one of us in the White House.
Yeah, no. So I think it's very important to understand the intersectionality of the United States, right? We want to celebrate our diversity. And this is playing out and manifested in our Democratic nominee, right? She is the first woman, the first Black woman, and the first Indian woman of descent to run for office. And
This has also taken racist turns. One of the Republican Party leaders has called her a DEI candidate.
Yes. And so, and that goes to my point. So in our country where we talk about being the longest democracy, right? We know in order to have a strong democracy, we need to have full and maximized participation of our citizens, right? And so you're seeing this manifest within this presidential candidate. We should be celebrating DEI efforts, right? Because this is what actually makes our country stronger. And so to suggest that the vice president of the United States, the second in command, somehow did not get there on her own morals, that she is unqualified, it is a slap in the face of what we say is our democracy, our system, and the office of vice president. And so while we are not going to focus on that rhetoric, because this is something that we know that President Trump does, right? Instead of standing on records, he resorts to personal attacks. We've seen that play out. This is not just with this candidate. And so while President Trump is focused on personal attacks, Vice President Harris is focusing on policy and people and restoring joy back into our elections.
Why do you think President Trump is a better candidate?
Well, I think that despite the rhetoric and despite some of the things that he says in public, most of his policies during his term as president the first time around, there is a strong sense still within the Republican Party that there were good policies around trade, around around foreign policy in most areas, particularly in terms of security and national defense. And so I think you'll see Republicans coalescing around those issues to put him back in office next year.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you so much for having us.